Before we begin, drop a comment below with your country and what time it is right now where you're watching. Whether it's sunrise in Nairobi, midnight in New York, afternoon in Canada, or evening in France, I want to know. Don't just sit back. Tell me where in the world you are. Now, let's dive into the story. Saren Vale's fingers trembled as she stood before the Iron Howl auction yard stage, the cold metal scent of chains mixing with torch smoke that stung her eyes. Draxen Thornwolf, the captured alpha, knelt in the dirt beneath the jeering crowd, his wrists bound with silver shackles that hissed against his skin. The auction master, Marrow Vex, yanked the chain harshly, forcing Draxen's head up. His eyes, molten and fierce even through exhaustion, met Saren's for a single breath that stole the air from her body. She hadn't come here for him. She'd come because she had nowhere else to go. She'd come because Eldrick Fenrock, the village healer, refused again to give her the medicine her aunt needed without coin. Saren had 1 silver left, a single cracked coin she'd been saving for days. She held it so tightly it dug into her palm, grounding her in a place she didn't belong. But Eldrick had turned her away again, muttering excuses about shortages and higher-paying patients. So Saren wandered toward Ironhowl, drawn by the noise, by instinct, or maybe by something deeper she didn't understand. Marrow Vex's voice boomed as he dropped the price again, hope draining from the crowd as the thrill of the spectacle dimmed. Draxen swayed on his knees, chest heaving, pride refusing to let him fall even as silver burned his skin raw. Saren stared at him, feeling something twist inside her, something sharp, unwelcome, confusing. She should leave. She should return to Thornmere Village, swallow her anger, and beg again for help. But instead she stood frozen, watching as the price fell so low the crowd grew bored. Marrow Vex rolled his eyes. 1 silver, he snarled. Lowest bid. No one moved. No one spoke. The silence pressed down on her until her hand lifted on its own. Marrow Vex barked laughter so loud it shook the timber beams. 1 silver? Girl, this is an alpha, not a stray dog. Saren forced her chin up, even as shame heated her cheeks. It's all I have. The crowd hooted, hungry for mockery. Marrow shrugged, disgusted at the lack of profit, and plucked the cracked silver from her hand.
Fine.
He's yours. Take the beast. He shoved the chain toward her. The impact jolted up her arm, far heavier than she expected. Draxen lifted his gaze again, slow, deliberate, and terrifyingly aware. Saren's breath hitched. Someone behind her muttered she was insane. Another laughed that she'd regret it before dawn. She barely heard them. The chain shimmered in her trembling grip, a reminder that she'd crossed a line she didn't understand. Draxen rose unsteadily, towering even in his weakened state, and the crowd moved aside with sudden fear. Saren swallowed hard. This wasn't bravery. This was a mistake. They slipped into the broken pines forest, moonlight slipping between skeletal branches. Saren kept her pace steady, glancing over her shoulder each time Draxen staggered. He was hurt, badly, but still impossibly large, every breath rumbling like distant thunder. She led him to an abandoned woodcutter's shack she sometimes used for shelter. Inside, the air was cold but quiet. Saren freed him from the chain with shaking hands, though the shackles remained locked, silver biting into his wrists. He sank onto the straw-covered floor without a word. She settled against the far wall, hugging her knees, telling herself she'd leave at first light. She told herself he wouldn't last through the night. She told herself the Bond stories were myths. The shack groaned with the wind, and Saren rested her head against the wall, exhaustion finally dragging her into uneasy sleep. Dawn crept into the shack like a silent intruder. Saren stirred, her back aching, her limbs stiff. A strange warmth brushed her cheek. She blinked and froze. Draxen was standing over her, unshackled, unbound, towering with a power that hadn't been there hours before. The silver burns on his wrists were gone. His posture was steady, dangerous, unmistakably alpha. Saren's breath hitched as his shadow swallowed the thin light around her. You freed me, Draxen said, voice low, rough, and impossibly steady. His gaze held hers as if he had been watching her long before she woke. Saren scrambled back, hitting the wall with a soft gasp. Draxen didn't move closer, but his presence filled the room like a storm about to break. Among my kind, a life saved is a bond sealed, he murmured. You spent your last coin to spare me humiliation and death. Saren shook her head, panic rising. I didn't mean to bind anything. I only wanted to help. A faint, almost human ache crossed his expression. Saren Vale stood frozen beneath the weight of Draxen Thornwolf's words, the morning light slicing through the cracks of the shack like thin blades. She pulled her knees closer, trying to protect the fragile pieces of her courage. Draxen's presence felt larger than the cramped space, his regained strength radiating like heat from a wildfire. She could barely reconcile this towering figure with the beaten creature she had led from the Iron Howl auction yard only hours before. Saren steadied her breath and forced her gaze upward. There is no bond, she whispered. I didn't ask for one. Draxen's eyes, bright and unsettling, softened just enough to reveal something almost sorrowful beneath the alpha intensity. Bonds are not asked for, he said. They are forged by truth. Saren shook her head. Truth? She didn't own truth. She barely owned hope. And yet Draxen looked at her as if she had shifted his world by lifting a single coin. Her heartbeat thudded painfully in her chest, reminding her she had other responsibilities, ones she couldn't abandon for a wolf she didn't understand. She rose slowly, careful not to provoke him, and brushed the dust from her skirt with shaking hands. Outside the shack, Broken Pines forest whispered with early wind, the trees bending like watchers holding secrets. Saren stepped toward the doorway, needing space, needing breath. I don't belong in your world, she said. I can't be part of whatever you think this bond is. Draxen followed her with his gaze, but stayed rooted to the center of the shack, as if restraining himself from overwhelming her with his presence. You belong where you are safe, he murmured. And right now, that is near me. The words should have comforted her. Instead, they crawled beneath her ribs like something sharp. She stepped outside, hugging her arms around herself. The cold bit her skin, but it steadied her trembling thoughts. She needed to return to Thornmere Village. She needed medicine. She needed her life to stay small and simple, untouched by wolves and ancient laws. Behind her, Draxen remained silent, watching. Saren stepped outside, hoping the cold air would clear the storm inside her mind. The forest greeted her with frost-lace needles, the scent of pine, and distant calls of waking creatures. She needed to get home to Thornmere Village. Her aunt would be waiting, coughing, weakening. The weight of responsibility pulled her forward. She began walking toward the narrow path leading downhill, relieved when she didn't hear footsteps behind her. But after 10 paces, a low rumble drifted from the shadows, a sound like stones shifting beneath pressure. Draxen emerged between two pines, moving with startling silence for someone so large. Saren stopped, frustration flickering through her exhaustion. You said you would stay in the shack. Draxen tilted his head. I said I would not crowd you. Saren clenched her jaw. I need to go alone. He didn't argue. Instead, he slipped back into the shadows, melting into the forest until only his presence lingered, warm and unshakable. Saren sighed, unsure whether to be grateful or terrified. They walked toward the village with a fragile distance between them, Saren leading and Draxen keeping to the trees like a guardian carved from moonlight and muscle. She felt his presence even when she didn't look, quiet, attentive, unyieldingly near. Thornmere's rooftops appeared through the fog, crooked chimneys and weathered wood leaning as though tired of the years. Saren's stomach twisted. People already judged her for being poor, for being unlucky, for needing help too often. Returning with an alpha trailing in secret behind her was another problem she didn't have the strength to face. But as she neared the village gate, she heard the rustle of movement in the trees. Draxen remained hidden, just as he promised. Still, her pulse jumped every time she sensed him adjust his position. Thornmere felt smaller today, more fragile, as though the weight of a wolf's gaze exposed every crack in its structures. Saren took a steadying breath and stepped onto the cobblestone path leading into the square. Thornmere village was already stirring. Smoke curled from chimneys, and the distant clang of metal hinted that Brannick Holt, the blacksmith, had begun his work early. Saren kept her hood low as she walked through the square, ignoring muttered greetings and sidelong glances. She headed straight for Eldrick Fenrock's cottage, the healer who'd turned her away the day before. Her stomach knotted as she knocked on the door. Eldrick opened it slowly, eyes widening with annoyance. "Back again," he sighed. "I told you I can't help unless you have payment." Saren swallowed her pride. "Please. My aunt's fever is worse. I tried everything. I just need a small dose of frostroot or anything to ease her breathing." Eldrick scoffed, wiping his hands on a cloth. "And how do you plan to pay this time?" His gaze swept over her patched clothes, her empty hands. Saren opened her mouth, but no words came. She had nothing left. Nothing except the impossible truth she could never tell, that an alpha now watched her from the shadows like a silent storm. Eldrick's expression hardened, and he began to close the door. Draxon's presence pressed close, unseen but powerful, waiting for Saren's breaking point. Saren Vale stood frozen at Eldrick Fenrock's closing door, her trembling hand still hovering where the wood had nearly slammed against her fingers. The cold morning air pressed against her back, but it was nothing compared to the chills spreading through her chest. She had hoped, foolishly, that Eldrick would show even a scrap of mercy. But mercy had no place in Thornmere village for someone like her. She stepped back, blinking hard against rising tears. Behind her, distant in the broken pines, she felt Draxon Thornwolf's presence like a silent weight against the air. She didn't know how she sensed him, but she did, warm, alert, protective. Saren drew in a shaky breath and forced herself to keep walking. She had no medicine, no coin, no solution. The world felt unbearably heavy, as though every breath demanded courage she didn't have. She turned away from Eldrick's door, pulling her hood low, hoping no one noticed the shaking in her hands or the dread in her eyes. But Thornmere always noticed. Saren lowered her hood slightly, letting the cold morning air dry her eyes before she walked toward Thornmere's dusty market road. People bustled around her, carrying baskets, selling vegetables, gossiping in hushed voices. But Saren felt every stare, every whispered suspicion brushing against her like thorns. She stopped at a stall selling root bundles, hoping someone might offer a small pity discount. But when she approached, Tavia Lorne, her neighbor, stiffened. "Saren," Tavia greeted with a tight smile. "You look pale." Saren forced a smile she didn't feel. "Long night." Tavia's gaze softened for a moment as she looked past Saren toward the forest edge. "There were strange sounds last night," she murmured. "Growls. Heavy ones." Saren's heart lurched. She glanced quickly toward the pines, trying not to visibly react. "Probably just wind," she said. But Tavia shook her head. "Wind doesn't shake the ground." Saren swallowed. She wished she could disappear into the forest and hide from questions she couldn't answer. Tavia shifted uncomfortably, glancing around as if afraid of being seen speaking with her too long. "There's a hunter-gathering happening this evening," she whispered. Reelan Crestfall said a wolf pack has been seen near the ridge. "They're preparing traps." Saren's heart lurched painfully. Draxon. He was hiding in the forest's edge, right where the hunters would begin their sweep. She forced her voice steady. "Are they sure it's a pack?" "That's what Reelan said." Tavia leaned closer, lowering her voice. "They think wolves are migrating closer. Maybe hungry, maybe preparing an attack." Saren shook her head. "Wolves don't attack without reason." Tavia hesitated, then whispered, "Reelan said this one was big. Bigger than he's ever seen." Saren froze. Draxon wasn't just any wolf. He was an alpha. If hunters found him, they wouldn't stand a chance, and neither would he if silver traps still weakened him. Saren backed away from the stall. "Thank you, Tavia." Her voice was barely audible. She turned, heart pounding, and hurried toward the forest path. Saren stepped away from the square, her mind racing with panic and dread. The broken pines forest felt impossibly far now, separated from her by streets full of watchful eyes and wagging tongues. She quickened her pace, heading toward the narrow path behind the baker's shop where few villagers wandered this early. As she slipped out of the village's edge, she caught movement in the corner of her eye, a shadow shifting between the trees. Her breath stalled as Draxon emerged silently from the forest, his presence massive even without revealing his true form. He didn't speak, but the tension in his stance told her he felt the danger too. Saren ran the last few steps to him. The hunters, real and crestfall, they're planning traps. Tonight, near Ravenspire Ridge. Draxon's expression sharpened instantly, a low rumble vibrating beneath his breath. They believe they hunt common wolves. Saren nodded. They don't know what's really out there. Draxon studied her with an intensity that made her chest tighten. You came straight to warn me. Saren swallowed. Of course I did. They moved deeper into the forest, where sunlight fractured into pale shards between the tall pines. The hunters are preparing traps tonight, Saren whispered. They said a pack was spotted near Ravenspire Ridge. Draxon's expression hardened. Vorik Shadeclaw, he muttered. The name felt heavy, dangerous, full of histories Saren didn't understand. He would move his pack this close only to provoke. Saren swallowed, unsure whether she had made things worse by speaking. Will he come after you? Vorik will come because you are weakened, Draxon said, his jaw tightening. Vorik wants blood, not victory. Saren felt a tremor run through her. The forest suddenly seemed smaller, as if danger lurked behind every trunk. She walked beside him, her steps soft in the pine needles. You said a life saved forms a bond, she whispered. Does that bond put me in danger too? Draxon stopped walking. His gaze turned toward her, intense with something unspoken. Yes, he answered honestly. But it also protects you. Saren's breath caught. She wasn't sure whether that comforted or frightened her more. You should leave, she murmured. Before the hunters find you. Draxon's expression darkened with quiet disagreement. I will not leave you vulnerable. His tone was steady, but there was a storm beneath it. Unwilling, immovable, absolute. Saren hugged herself, unsure how to carry the weight of being important to someone, even unwillingly. I'm not worth this trouble, she said softly. Draxon's eyes narrowed. You spent your last coin on me, he said. Not because I deserved it. Because you could not watch cruelty. Saren looked down, ashamed of the truth and afraid of it at once. They continued walking until the forest opened into a small clearing she recognized, a place where the woodcutters once stacked timber. Now, grass had grown wild around the old stumps. Draxon stepped forward, lifting his head slightly, sensing the air. Vorik's scouts have been here, he murmured. Saren stiffened. Are they close? Not yet. He turned toward her fully now, his presence towering but steadier than before. Saren Vale, listen to me carefully. If hunters move tonight, and Vorik moves as well, Thornmere will be between them. Saren felt the blood drain from her face. My village. Your people will be in the path of a conflict they cannot see coming. Fear clawed up her throat. Then we have to warn them. But Draxon shook his head. They will not listen. Humans believe what comforts them, not what saves them. She hated that he was right. Thornmere dismissed her even on ordinary days. They would never believe a girl with no status and no coin if she warned them of wolf duels in the night. What do we do? She whispered. Draxon stepped closer, lowering his voice. I need to regain full strength. There is someone who can help, Iskara Vane, a seer who lives beyond the ravine. Saren blinked. The name felt strange, haunting. A seer? He nodded once. She knows our laws. She knows the old magics that bind and break bonds. Saren's heart twisted sharply. Break. Draxon paused. Too long. If needed, he said, his voice quieter. Saren bit her lip, feeling an ache she didn't want to name. Where do we find her? Across the ridge, he said. But it is a dangerous path. Everything is dangerous now, Saren whispered. Draxon's gaze softened. You fear much, he murmured, but you still walk forward. She didn't feel brave. She felt tired, cold, overwhelmed. But when Draxen extended a hand, not touching, simply offering, Saren inhaled and nodded. Let's go. They turned toward the ridge, shadows shifting beneath the pines as if the forest itself listened. Above them, distant crows circled the gray sky, their cries sharp and warning. Saren's fear grew with each step, but something else grew too, a strange, fragile thread tying her to the wolf who now walked beside her. She didn't know whether it was destiny or disaster. The forest seemed darker with every step forward. Saren Vale followed Draxen Thornwolf through the deepening forest, the shadows thickening as the ridge path narrowed into a winding trail carved long ago by forgotten travelers. Each step forward felt heavier than the last, as if the woods themselves resisted their passage. Frost clung to the low branches, sparkling faintly in the dim morning light. Saren wrapped her arms tight around her torso, trying to contain the mix of fear and determination rattling inside her. Draxen walked ahead in human form, though his movements carried the controlled grace of a wolf ready to spring. How far is Iskara Vane? Saren asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Beyond the ravine, Draxen answered. She shelters herself from both humans and wolves. Saren wasn't sure whether that comforted her. The idea of seeking help from a seer, a being whispered about in childhood tales, felt like stepping into a story she wasn't meant to touch. Still, she had agreed to come. For her aunt. For Thornmere. For Draxen. As they climbed toward Ravenspire Ridge, the pines grew taller, their trunks twisted like old scars against the gray sky. Saren's feet ached from the frozen ground, but she forced herself to keep up with Draxen's pace. A sudden snap echoed nearby, and she flinched before realizing it was only a falling branch. Still, her pulse raced with every sound. You sense them, don't you? She asked softly. Draxen didn't slow. Vorik scouts. They watch, but they won't strike yet. Not while I'm with you. His confidence should have calmed her. Instead, it coiled her stomach tighter with dread. Saren glanced around, imagining hidden eyes in the branches. She wondered whether Vorik knew she existed, whether her involvement mattered to him at all. They're waiting for you to weaken, she whispered. Draxen's jaw tightened. That is why we must reach Iskara quickly. His certainty felt like a lifeline, and Saren clung to it as they pushed forward into the cold wind. They pressed forward until the terrain grew jagged, the ridge sloping downward toward a chasm carved by centuries of storms. Saren hesitated as the roaring wind from below whipped through her cloak. The ravine stretched wide, a gaping maw between cliffs of black stone. A narrow bridge of fallen timber connected the two sides, wobbling under the pressure of every gust. Draxen examined it with a grim expression. Iskara built no safe path for visitors, he muttered. Saren's throat tightened. We're crossing that. Draxen stepped onto the first beam, testing its hold. The wood groaned dangerously. Stay close behind me. Don't look down. Saren tried, but as soon as she took the first step, the dizzying drop below yanked her gaze downward. Her breath hitched. Draxen, eyes on me, he commanded. She forced her trembling legs forward, gripping the frigid rails. Beneath her, the wind howled like a hungry beast. Each step felt like stepping onto the edge of death. Draxen reached the other side and extended a steadying hand. Saren grasped it, stumbling into safety with a gasp. She'd barely caught her breath when the faint sound of distant howls rose behind them. Beyond the ravine, the forest shifted into a place untouched by ordinary rules. Strange blue flowers glowed faintly among the roots, and the air shimmered with drifting motes of silver light. Saren felt her heartbeat slow, as though the forest itself pressed gentle fingers against her fear. This is seer territory, Draxen whispered. Tread with respect. Saren nodded, too overwhelmed to respond. A faint path wound between the glowing plants, leading toward a silhouette emerging from the pale mist. A woman stepped forward, tall, ageless, draped in layered robes the color of moonstone. Her hair fell like silver water over her shoulders. Her eyes were pale and unfathomable, holding depths Saren couldn't name. Draxen Thornwolf, the woman said, her voice echoing like memory. And the girl who dared spend her last coin. Saren stiffened. Draxen bowed his head slightly. Iskara Vane, he greeted. Saren swallowed, unsure whether she was meant to bow too. Iskara's gaze drifted over her, curious and knowing. The bond hums fiercely. I felt your approach long before you crossed my threshold. Iskara gestured for them to follow, leading them into a clearing surrounded by ancient stones carved with runes that pulsed faintly. Saren felt energy hum beneath her feet, as though the ground itself breathed. You are hunted by more than wolves, Iskara said. Vork seeks to claim dominion over Ravenspire Ridge. Slaying Draxen will prove his power. Saren shivered. Then we should break the bond, she whispered. If I'm the reason Vork hunts him. Iskara raised a hand sharply. Child, you misunderstand. The bond was not forged from weakness or fear. It was born from a choice made in truth, and such bonds carry strength, not burden. If severed, both of you would fracture in ways you cannot yet comprehend. Saren's breath caught, her thoughts spiraling. Draxen stepped closer, his presence steady beside her. Iskara's eyes softened. To survive what comes, you must trust each other. The path ahead is dangerous, but the bond may be the only shield strong enough to withstand the storm. The forest seemed darker with every step forward. Saren Vale stood in the seer's clearing, the runes pulsing faintly beneath her boots like soft heartbeats in the earth. The world felt different here, quieter, older, as if time itself paused to listen. Iskara Vane watched her with unreadable eyes, and Saren felt as though every secret she'd ever buried trembled beneath the surface. Draxen Thornwolf stood close enough that she could feel the heat of his presence, though he made no move to touch her. Your bond is young, Iskara murmured, circling them. Fragile, yet powerful. Saren's breath caught. The bond still frightened her, a thread she didn't understand pulling her toward a life she never asked for. Iskara paused in front of Draxen, her gaze sharpening. But something weakens you still. Draxen clenched his jaw. Vork's traps, he answered. Silver-laced. Iskara nodded grimly. Then the burden of survival rests heavily upon both of you. Saren swallowed, feeling the weight settle like frost inside her chest. The ancient stones hummed, vibrating through the soles of Saren's boots. She shivered as a low breeze stirred her cloak. Iskara stood tall, raising a hand over Draxen's chest. The runes carved into the stones brightened, casting pale blue light across the clearing. Saren watched, tense, unsure whether this ritual would strengthen Draxen or tear him apart. His jaw tightened, muscles coiling beneath his skin as Iskara whispered in an ancient tongue. The air thickened, swirling with faint silver threads that wrapped around Draxen like drifting smoke. Saren stepped forward instinctively, drawn by some force she didn't recognize, but Iskara snapped her fingers. Do not interfere, the seer warned. Saren halted, her pulse pounding. The energy surged, spiraling around Draxen with increasing intensity. For a moment, Saren feared the ritual might consume him. But then, with a forceful exhale, the silver threads dissolved into the air. Draxen steadied, his stance firm, his eyes clearing as if a fog had lifted. When the ritual finally eased, Iskara's shoulders sagged with exhaustion. She lowered her hands, and the forest quieted again. Draxen drew in a long breath, the tension in his body slowly melting. Your strength will return quickly now, Iskara said. But strength draws enemies like blood draws predators. Saren frowned. Vorek will come sooner? Iskara nodded grimly. And not alone. Saren felt the cold sink deeper into her bones. Draxen stepped forward, steady again, more grounded than he had been since the auction. What can we do? He asked. Iskara looked between them with uncertainty. You must prepare to flee or to fight. Saren's heart lurched. My village can't fight wolves. They don't even believe wolves threaten us. Iskara's gaze drifted downward. Sometimes disbelief is the deadliest weakness. Draxen placed a steady hand near Saren's back, not touching, but close enough to ground her shaking breath. The seer stepped closer to Saren, her pale eyes sharp. You fear the bond, yet you walk its path. Do you know what that means? Saren swallowed hard. I didn't choose this. Choice is not always loud, Iskara said softly. Sometimes it is the smallest action, the quietest mercy, the one coin you never meant to spend. Saren's breath trembled. Iskara touched her shoulder gently, almost motherly. But hear me, child, your part in this story is not weakness. It is catalyst. Saren blinked, unsure whether to feel strengthened or terrified by the words. Iskara stepped back, her robes shifting like mist. You must go. Danger approaches from the ridge. If you stay here, you risk drawing it to my door. Draxen bowed his head. Saren took a steadying breath. The seer's clearing suddenly felt too bright, too exposed, too filled with truths she didn't yet know how to carry. She walked back into the glowing forest with Draxen, the air shimmering around them as the clearing disappeared behind the trees. Saren pressed a hand to her chest, still feeling echoes of the ritual's humming energy. Draxen walked beside her, quieter than before, the weight of Iskara's words heavy between them. What did she mean? Saren asked softly. About me being a catalyst? Draxen exhaled slowly. Seers speak in truths twisted like vines. Whatever she saw, we will learn it soon enough. Saren nodded, though unease coiled in her stomach. Draxen paused, glancing toward the ridge, as if sensing movement. Vorik will not wait long. He will test the borders before nightfall. Saren felt her pulse quicken. Then we need to return to Thornmere, she said. My aunt, my village, they're in the middle of all this. Draxen nodded slowly. We will go. But understand this. Once we step out of seer territory, Vorik scouts can strike. The warning settled like ice against her skin. Yet Saren lifted her chin. Then we'll move quickly. They started back toward the ravine, the blue flowers dimming as they left the clearing's magic behind. Saren's thoughts churned with fear and a strange determination she couldn't quite name. Draxen walked close but did not touch her. Still, she felt the pull of the bond like a faint thread tightening between them. Iskara said breaking it would fracture us, she murmured. Did she mean physically? Draxen hesitated. In our world, bonds are sacred. Severing one can wound the spirit, sometimes permanently. She stopped walking, stunned by the raw honesty in his voice. Draxen turned back to her, golden eyes softening in the shadows. I do not regret the bond, he said. What I regret is the danger it places upon you. Saren looked down at her hands. They still trembled, but not from fear alone. I chose to save you, she whispered. I didn't know what it meant, but I chose it. Something softened in Draxen's expression, something that frightened her more than anger ever could have. He stepped closer, close enough that their breath mingled between them. Then we will face what comes together. Saren's chest tightened, not with fear this time, but something equally overwhelming. She nodded, unable to speak. They continued through the forest, the wind stirring the high branches with a restless rhythm. Shadows shifted behind trunks, and Saren tensed, sensing unseen watchers. Draxen inhaled sharply. Vorik's scouts are near, he warned. Move carefully. Saren followed every step he made, each heartbeat loud in her ears. The ridge approached, the narrow bridge stretching before them once more. We cross fast, Draxen said. They reached the other side just as a howl split the air, low, chilling, predatory. Saren froze. Was that Vorik's signal? Draxen growled. He knows we sought the seer. Fear surged through Saren's veins. Will he come after us now? He will come after me, Draxen corrected. But you are with me. That makes you a target. Before she could respond, a sharp crack echoed from the right. Saren jerked her head toward the sound. Between the trees, a dark shape darted through the shadows, too fast for human eyes, too silent for any ordinary creature. Draxen pushed Saren behind him, his stance shifting into something feral, protective, instinctive. They're here, he whispered. Scouts. Saren's heart hammered wildly. She could barely breathe. What do we do? We run, Draxen said. And we do not stop until Thormir's gate is in sight. They sprinted down the ridge path, branches whipping past them, the forest roaring with distant howls. Saren stumbled once, but Draxen steadied her with a hand at her waist before pulling her forward. The connection between them burned stronger now, guiding her feet as much as instinct. She felt him, felt his fear for her, felt his strength pushing her onward. When Thormir's distant rooftops finally broke through the trees, Saren nearly sobbed with relief. But Draxen's voice cut through her breathless hope. Do not slow, he urged. This is only beginning. The wind carried another howl, closer this time, hungry. Saren's determination hardened like stone. Whatever storm was coming, she would not face it running. She squared her shoulders, breath trembling. Let them come, she whispered. We're ready. The forest seemed darker with every step forward. Saren Vale burst from the treeline with Draxen Thornwolf at her side, the cold wind scraping against her cheeks as Thornmere village finally emerged through the thinning fog. Her lungs burned, but she didn't dare slow. Behind them, the forest crackled with predatory movement, Vork Shadeclaw's scouts closing in. Draxen's hand hovered near her back, guiding her towards safety without ever touching. Faster, he urged, voice low but steady. Saren stumbled over a root, catching herself just in time. Her legs felt like trembling branches, her breath slicing sharp and cold through her chest. The rooftops of Thornmere now looked less like home and more like fragile shields against a storm. Almost there, Draxen said. But the tension in his voice betrayed the urgency beneath. Saren swallowed hard and pushed herself harder, sprinting the last few steps until the first familiar fence posts came into view. They reached the outskirts of Thornmere, where the crooked houses leaned against one another like weary sentinels. Smoke curled lazily from chimneys, ignorant of the danger approaching. Saren's pulse raced. We need to warn someone, she gasped. Draxen shook his head. They won't believe you, Saren. Humans dismiss what they fear. Saren clenched her jaw. We have to try. She sprinted toward the square, ignoring the startled glances of villagers as she ran past. Tavia Lorne stepped out from her stall, eyes widening. Saren? Why are you? Danger, Saren breathed. Wolves. In the forest. Tavia frowned. Wolves? Are you sure? Saren fought to find words. They're coming this way. But doubt crept across Tavia's expression. Before Saren could say more, several villagers paused their conversations, turning curious eyes toward her. She felt panic twisting tight inside her, but she couldn't stop now. The glances sharpened. Conversation stopped. Even children paused mid-play. Saren felt the world shrink around her. Tavia stepped closer, brow furrowed. Saren, are you ill? You look like you've seen a ghost. Saren shook her head fiercely. Not a ghost. Wolves. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Relan Crestfall, tall and broad-shouldered with his hunter's bow slung across his back, strode toward her with suspicion in his eyes. You're claiming wolves are near? Saren nodded. Not just near. Coming. Relan scoffed. We'd have heard them. Saren pointed toward the forest. They're scouts. They're quiet. Relan stepped so close she could smell pine on his clothes. You expect us to panic because you say so? Saren's throat tightened. I saw them. He narrowed his eyes, voice dropping. Why were you in the forest alone? Saren froze. She couldn't speak. Couldn't tell him the truth. Not without making everything worse. Saren backed against the well, panic clawing at her ribs. Draxen's presence pressed at the edge of her senses, a steady anchor as chaos swelled. Relan reached for her arm, gripping too tightly. Something's wrong with you, he muttered. You came out of the forest with fear in your eyes and lies in your mouth. Saren tried to pull away. Let go. His grip tightened. Not until you explain. Draxen emerged from the shadows between the houses like a storm given shape. No longer hiding. No longer cautious. His eyes glowed gold, burning through the dim morning light. "Release her," he growled. The villagers gasped, stumbling backward. Rieland's face drained of color. What? How? Draxen stepped closer, towering. "I will not repeat myself." Rieland released Saren instantly, stumbling away. Saren pressed a shaking hand to her chest, trying to steady her breathing. Draxen's presence wrapped around her like a shield. The village square devolved into chaos. Children screamed and fled. Adults ducked into homes, dragging loved ones with them. Only Rieland stood his ground, fury burning beneath his pride. "You dare threaten my people?" he spat. Draxen took a single step forward, the air crackling with tension. "I don't threaten prey," he growled, "but I will protect what is mine." Saren's breath hitched at the final word. "Mine." Rieland scoffed. "She belongs to no one." Draxen's eyes flashed. "Then you shouldn't have touched her." Rieland's face twisted with rage. He lunged, drawing a hunting knife from his belt. Saren gasped, stepping back as the blade flashed in the pale light. But Rieland never reached her. Draxen moved faster than human sight, intercepting him with a force that sent Rieland sprawling across the ground. The knife skittered away, clattering against cobblestones. Saren stood frozen, her pulse a frantic drum. Draxen loomed over Rieland, but did not strike again. "I warned you," he said quietly. "Do not touch her." Saren stepped forward, gripping Draxen's arm. "Stop," she whispered. "Please. Don't hurt him." Draxen froze at the sound of her voice. Slowly, he released Rieland, who scrambled backward, panting. The villagers peeked from doorways, their fear palpable. "You brought a monster here," Rieland shouted, pointing at Draxen with shaking fingers. Saren shook her head. "I brought someone who saved me." "Saved you?" Rieland barked. "From what?" Saren's throat tightened. She couldn't tell them everything. They wouldn't believe her. But the truth pressed inside her chest until she could barely breathe. A scream split the air from the northern edge of the village. Saren's head snapped toward the sound. A woman stumbled into view, her apron torn, her face pale. "Wolves! They're circling the fields," she cried. The villagers erupted into panic shouts. Rieland grabbed his bow. "Everyone inside. Barricade the doors." But Draxen stepped forward. "Vork sent them," he growled. "They're testing the borders." Saren's pulse stuttered. "Testing for what?" "For weakness," Draxen responded. Across the field, dark shapes emerged between the tall grass, wolves, large and silent, eyes glinting with malice. Saren counted 5, maybe 6. Their formation was deliberate, strategic. These weren't ordinary wolves. "We have to get everyone somewhere safe," Saren urged. Rieland scoffed. "There is no safe place from beasts like that." But Draxen shook his head. "There is. The old grain hold in the center of the village. Thick stone. Only one entrance." Saren nodded. "We can fit everyone there." The villagers hesitated, torn between disbelief and terror. Saren raised her voice, surprising even herself. "Please. If you don't trust him, trust me. We don't have time to argue." Another howl pierced the air. That broke them. People began running toward the grain hold, clutching children, dragging elders. Rieland reluctantly directed them, though his glare never left Draxen. Saren stood beside Draxen as the last villagers fled inside. The wolves prowled closer, their growls vibrating through the earth. "Vork is close," Draxen murmured. "He's watching." Saren swallowed hard. "What does he want?" "Me," Draxen answered. "Alive or broken?" Saren's voice cracked. "And me." Draxen's gaze softened, but his tone was grim. "You are leverage." The wolves lunged as one. Saren staggered back, but Draxen shifted, bones cracking, muscles expanding, fur erupting across his form. In seconds, the alpha wolf stood where the man had been, massive and devastatingly powerful. He met the first wolf mid-leap, throwing it aside with a brutal swipe. Saren pressed herself against the wall of the grain hold, heart hammering as Draxen fought. 2 wolves circled behind him. Saren screamed his name, though she didn't know if he could hear. He spun, snapping down on one, sending it yelping into the dirt. The third wolf leapt toward Saren. She froze. The beast's jaws opened wide, only to be slammed aside by Draxen's massive weight. He placed himself between her and every threat, fighting with a fury that shook the ground. The attacking wolves faltered. One limped away. Another collapsed. The remaining two retreated into the shadows, whining. Draxen snarled after them, but did not pursue. He turned toward Saren, blood streaking his fur, his chest heaving. Saren rushed to him, knees weak. "Draxen," she whispered, touching his shoulder. His fur bristled at her touch, then slowly softened. Before he could shift back, a cold, echoing voice drifted across the field. "Impressive, Thornwolf." Saren's breath caught. A tall figure stood at the edge of the trees, shadowed by mist, his eyes glowing silver, with cruel intelligence. Vorik Shadeclaw. Her blood ran cold. Draxen stepped in front of her again. The challenger laughed softly. "I've come to claim what's mine." Saren trembled behind Draxen's towering form. Vorik's gaze slid to her, sharp and hungry. "And the girl," he added. "The bond makes her valuable." Draxen growled, low and lethal. Vorik raised a hand. "Tonight, Thornwolf. The Ridge. You cannot hide from the challenge." With that, he vanished back into the trees, his wolves scattering with him, leaving the field eerily quiet. Draxen shifted back slowly, collapsing to one knee. Saren caught him, breath shaking. "Draxen, are you?" He pressed a hand to her cheek. "It begins tonight," he whispered. "The challenge. My life and yours." Saren Vale helped Draxen Thornwolf rise from the ground, her hands trembling as she steadied his weight. The fading light of evening washed Thornmere village in streaks of orange and gold, but its beauty was swallowed by fear. Vorik Shadeclaw's words still echoed in her skull. "Tonight, the ridge, the challenge." Saren's breath came unevenly as she guided Draxen toward the shadowed alley behind the grain hold. He leaned heavily, blood streaking his side from the earlier fight. "You shouldn't shift again," she whispered. "Your wounds will heal enough," he replied through gritted teeth. "Vorik will not wait. And neither can we." Saren stared up at him, heart twisting painfully. His strength, his stubbornness, his willingness to stand between her and danger, it terrified her. But it also anchored her. "Then let me help you prepare," she murmured. "Whatever comes next, we face it together." Draxen's grip tightened around her hand for balance. Saren felt warmth pulse through her skin, grounding her. "How do we prepare for a fight against someone like Vorik?" she whispered. Draxen's gaze lifted toward the distant ridgeline, where the sky darkened into bruised shades of blue. "We don't prepare," he said. "We endure. We survive." Vorik is older, ruthless, strategic. But he underestimates bonds he cannot see. Saren swallowed hard. "Iskara said the bond might protect us." Draxen nodded slowly. "Yes. But neither of us has learned how to wield it." Saren frowned at the pulsing connection she could almost feel humming between their chests. "Then tonight might be the first and only chance to learn." Draxen's jaw tightened. "I won't let him touch you, even if it costs my life." Saren's heart lurched painfully. "Don't say that." But the fear in her voice said she believed it. They reached Saren's home, a small, crooked cottage tucked behind an overgrown garden. The windows glowed faintly from the lantern she'd left burning. Inside, her aunt lay sleeping, her breathing shallow and rattling. Saren's heart clenched. She knelt beside her aunt, checking her forehead, whispering reassurances she wasn't sure she believed. Draxen stood in the doorway, his presence silent but immense. "She needs frostroot," Saren murmured. "If Eldrick won't give it, I don't know what else to try." Draxen's eyes softened. "I'll get it." Saren turned sharply. "You can't. The hunters won't catch me." Before she could protest, he slipped into the night and returned minutes later, frostroot in hand. Saren crushed the herb, mixing it with warm water and helping her aunt drink. Slowly, her breathing eased. Saren let out a shaky breath. Thank you. Draxen met her gaze. She matters to you. She's all I have left. Not anymore, he murmured quietly. As Saren stepped outside, the first stars began to emerge above the treetops. The night felt heavier than usual, as though the sky itself braced for the coming violence. Draxen waited behind the cottage, already scanning the forest with sharp awareness. The hunters will see you, Saren warned softly. If you walk through the village like this, then we don't walk, Draxen said. We run the ridge from the far side. Humans won't see. Saren hesitated. Her entire body shook with fear and exhaustion. Yet when Draxen extended his hand, not commanding, just offering, she took it. His fingers closed around hers, warm and steady. Whatever happens, he whispered, stay close to me. Saren nodded, though her knees trembled. They slipped into the forest, keeping low, avoiding moonlit patches. Every crackle made Saren jump. Every distant howl sent chills down her spine. The night was alive with unseen watchers. The forest swallowed them in moments. Saren clung to Draxen's hand as they wove through branches and shadows, her breath clouding in the cold air. She could feel tension radiating from him, anticipation, anger, protectiveness, all swirling in the bond that pulsed between them. Whatever happens, she whispered, don't let Vorik hurt the village. Draxen squeezed her hand gently. My fight is with him, not them. They reached the base of Ravenspire Ridge just as the last sliver of sun vanished. The world turned cold, sharp, expectant. Saren's throat tightened at the dark silhouette waiting atop the ridge. Vorik Shakeclaw stood perfectly still, his silver eyes glowing like twin moons, reflecting hunger and triumph. 5 wolves flanked him, larger than the scouts before, their fur bristling with anticipation. Draxen released Saren's hand and stepped forward. Stay behind me, he ordered. Saren shook her head. I'm part of this whether I want to be or not. Vorik's laughter drifted down the slope. How touching, he mocked. The little human thinks she matters. Saren stiffened. Draxen's growl rumbled like thunder. She matters more than your entire pack. Vorik snarled at that, shifting effortlessly into his wolf form, massive, towering, fur black as midnight. Draxen followed suit, bones snapping, fur erupting, the transformation rippling through him like fire. Saren flinched at the sound but forced herself not to look away. The 2 alphas circled each other, the clearing vibrating with tension. Vorik lunged first. They collided with a force that shook the earth. Saren gasped as the wolves battled, claws tearing, teeth snapping, snarls filling the night. The fight was brutal, fast, merciless. Draxen was strong, but Vorik fought like someone desperate to reclaim power stolen by destiny. One of Vorik's wolves crept toward Saren. Her breath caught. She had no weapon, no shield. But as the wolf lunged, something inside her snapped. "No!" she screamed. A burst of heat shot through her chest, exploding outward like invisible fire. The wolf was thrown backward, yelping as it hit the ground. Saren stared at her hands, trembling, unable to understand what she'd done. Draxen felt it too. He faltered only for a moment, glancing toward her with shock and recognition. Vorik seized the opening, slamming Draxen into the ground. Saren ran forward without thinking. Draxen. Vorik pinned him, jaws closing around Draxen's shoulder. Draxen howled in pain. Saren's heart shattered. "Stop," she cried. But the wind stole her voice. Another spark ignited inside her. Not heat this time, but something deeper, older, vibrating through the bond. She stepped closer, tears burning her eyes. "Let him go," she whispered. "Please." Vorik froze. His wolves hesitated. Even the air seemed to pause. "The bond isn't a weakness," Saren whispered. "You fear it." Vorik lunged, straight for her. Draxen tore free, slamming into him with a roar. The wolves clashed brutally, tumbling toward the cliff's edge. The ground crumbled. Vorik slipped. Draxen lunged to catch him, but Vorik fell into the ravine with a final snarl. Silence blanketed the ridge. The remaining wolves fled. Draxen shifted back, collapsing. Saren caught him. "You're hurt," she whispered. "You called me back," he breathed. "Your voice, your bond." Saren stared at her trembling hands. "What's happening to me?" Draxen cupped her cheek. "Something I don't understand yet," he murmured. "But we'll find answers. Together." "We survived," she whispered.
"For now," he said.
But the bond revealed itself tonight. To everyone. Saren's heart pounded. "What does that mean?" "That we're out of time," Draxen murmured. And the night around them grew darker. Saren Vale half-carried Draxen Thornwolf down the slope of Ravenspire Ridge, the night air thick with the taste of iron and fear. The clearing behind them still hummed with the echo of the fallen Alpha's snarl, as if Vorik Shadeclaw's presence refused to die even after his body vanished into the ravine. Saren's legs trembled with every step, yet she refused to loosen her hold on Draxen's arm. His breaths came in harsh, ragged pulls, each one laced with pain. The moonlight revealed the deep gash along his shoulder, where Vorik's jaws had torn through flesh. Saren's heart thudded painfully. "Stay with me," she begged. Draxen steadied himself, but leaned into her, his strength waning. "The challenge is over," he murmured, voice strained. "But the consequences are only beginning." Saren tightened her grip. She didn't care about consequences. She cared about keeping him alive long enough to face them. They reached the base of the ridge, where the path widened into a hollow of twisted roots and moss. Draxen sagged against a fallen log, groaning as the pain surged through him. Saren knelt beside him, her hands frantic as she tore strips of cloth from her cloak. She pressed them against his wound, her fingers shaking as warm blood soaked through the cloth almost instantly. "This isn't enough," she muttered. "I need something stronger. Herbs, bandages, anything." Draxen caught her wrist, his grip weak but steady. "Saren, listen." She shook her head.
"No, don't talk like that."
"The wound isn't ordinary," he rasped. "It carries Vorik's intent, his malice. Even dead, an Alpha's bite lingers." Saren stared at him, fear tightening around her ribs. "Then what do we do?" Draxen's eyes flickered with something like sorrow. "We wait, and hope the bond gives me strength." The forest shifted, growing darker as clouds drifted across the moon. Saren brushed hair from her face, forcing herself to stay calm. "We need to get you to Ascara," she said. "She'll know what to do." Draxen shook his head sharply, then winced.
"No."
"The seer's path is too exposed, and she cannot heal what is wounded by an Alpha's challenge." Saren swallowed, panic threatening to rise in her throat. "Then what can?" Draxen hesitated. "Time." Saren glared at him. "You don't have time." A rustle echoed through the trees. Draxen tensed, eyes sharpening despite the pain. "Someone's coming." Saren rose to her feet, heart hammering. She braced herself, scanning the shadows. "More wolves," she whispered. Draxen inhaled deeply.
"No."
"Human." His expression twisted with warning. "Be careful. Humans in fear are more dangerous than beasts." The rustling came closer, branches snapping under deliberate footsteps. Saren braced herself, positioning her body between Draxen and the sound. A figure stepped from the shadows, not a wolf, but a man with sharp features and eyes like fractured ice. Eldrick Fenrock, the village healer. Saren's heart plummeted. "Eldrick? What are you doing here?" His gaze swept over her, then landed on Draxen's bleeding form with cold disgust. "I followed you, girl," he said. "Saw you running into the woods like a madwoman. Thought you needed help." His expression twisted. "But then I saw that thing beside you." Draxen growled weakly. Saren stepped forward, hands raised. "He's hurt. He saved the village." Eldrick scoffed. "Saved? He's the reason wolves came near. His kind draws danger, like rot draws flies." He pulled a small vial from his pocket, silverroot powder. "Fatal to a weakened wolf. Fatal even in human form." "Don't," Saren breathed. Eldrick uncorked the vial. "The village deserves to be safe," he said. "And that means ending him, and whatever curse you've dragged back home." Draxen forced himself upright, but pain buckled his legs. Saren, he rasped. Run. She shook her head violently. No. Eldrick flung the handful of silverroot powder toward them. Saren reacted without thought, throwing her body in front of Draxen. A force burst from her again, surging outward in a wave. The silverroot powder struck an invisible wall and ricocheted away, scattering harmlessly across the forest floor. Eldrick staggered backward, eyes wide with terror as the invisible barrier pulsed between them. Saren stared at her own hands, breath trembling. The energy faded slowly, leaving a faint warmth in her chest. Eldrick dropped the vial, stumbling away. What are you? He whispered. Saren didn't answer. She didn't know herself. Draxen reached for her hand, his voice weak but certain. You protected us, he murmured. Eldrick fled into the trees, vanishing into the darkness. Saren knelt beside Draxen again, her breath shaking. She didn't understand the power inside her. But she understood one thing clearly. Whatever she had become, whatever the bond had awakened, she would not let fear define it. And she would not let anyone take Draxen from her again. Saren Vale stayed kneeling beside Draxen Thornwolf as the forest seemed to hold its breath around them, the night thick with the aftermath of power she didn't understand. The invisible barrier she had created still shimmered faintly in the air, fading like ripples across water. Saren's heart pounded violently, her thoughts racing in jagged circles. She kept one hand on Draxen's chest, feeling the shallow rise and fall of his breath. His skin burned with fever, his wounds too deep for time alone to heal. Guilt stabbed through her. She had dragged him into this, hadn't she? Yet she knew she would make the same choices again. She brushed trembling fingers along his cheek, whispering, "Stay with me. Please." The moonlight spilled across their small clearing like a fragile blessing, but Saren felt the shadows pressing in, hungry and searching. Draxen forced his eyes open, a low growl rumbling in his throat. "We have to move," he murmured. Saren shook her head. "You can't walk. Not like this." Draxen shifted, trying to sit up, but pain twisted his expression. Vorik's absence won't stop the others. Wolves without an alpha fall into chaos. Saren clenched her jaw. "Then we'll move slowly." But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't possible. The forest was too dangerous, and dawn would bring hunters searching for the source of the commotion. She glanced toward the ridge. "If the pack comes now, they will." Draxen cut in weakly. "Vorik's fall will draw them. They'll come to seize power. And you," his eyes flickered to her chest. "You shine like a beacon they can smell." A low hum vibrated through the earth, soft but unmistakable. Saren felt it through her palms, a pulse that thrummed beneath Draxen's skin. She looked around, searching the shadows. "What is that?" Draxen's eyes widened slightly. "The bond," he rasped. "It's responding to your fear. To your will." Saren felt her breath hitch. "But I'm not doing anything." "You are," he whispered, without realizing. The hum grew stronger, a golden warmth gathering beneath Saren's ribs. It spread through her arms, bending the air around her. Draxen inhaled sharply. "Saren, stop." "I'm not doing it," she insisted. The light intensified. Saren gasped as it rushed outward, spiraling into the clearing like a soft explosion. It didn't feel like her power, it felt like a call. Ancient.
Deep.
Demanding to be answered. The clearing glowed with faint gold, illuminating the trees in a warm, unnatural light. Saren staggered backward as the energy poured from her, a force too vast to hold inside. Draxen's breathing steadied, the torn flesh knitting slowly, painfully, but undeniably. Saren stared in wonder as his wounds softened from severe to bearable. Draxen gasped, his strength returning in measured rushes. "Saren, you're healing me." She shook her head, terrified. "I don't know how." "The bond," he said again, voice rough. "You've tapped into something only legends ever spoke of." Saren's pulse tumbled. The light faded, but her veins still buzzed with a power she didn't understand, a power she couldn't control. "Draxen, what's happening to me?" He opened his mouth to answer. They didn't get the chance to say more. A howl cut through the night, sharp, furious, echoing off the ridge in a haunting cry. Saren's blood ran cold. More wolves. Draxen lifted his head, fury lighting his features. Vork's pack, he growled. They think I've fallen. They come to claim what's left. Saren felt the final pieces of fear inside her snap into something sharper. Resolve. Then they'll learn the truth. The forest rustled, multiple footsteps emerging from all directions. Saren stood, positioning herself in front of Draxen without hesitation. Her heart hammered, but she did not move. A massive wolf with steel gray fur stepped into the clearing, eyes narrowing at the sight of Draxen standing once more. Behind him, four others fanned out, forming a semicircle. Their growls vibrated through the trees. Saren stepped instinctively in front of Draxen. The wolves hesitated, confused by her defiance. One snarled. Another pawed the earth. Saren swallowed hard. "We don't want to fight," she said. "But we will." Her voice didn't tremble this time. The steel-gray wolf shifted, bones twisting until Rigger, Vork second, stood in human form. His face was carved from stone, his eyes glinting with malice. "Vork has fallen," he said. "We saw him plunge into the ravine. Our laws demand a new alpha." His gaze slid to Saren with cold interest. "And you, whatever you are, you belong to the winner of the challenge." Saren stepped back, revulsion rising in her throat. Draxen growled. "Touch her, and I tear your throat out." Rigger laughed. Bold words from a dying wolf. He sneered. "We will finish what Vork began. Two paths remain. You submit, or we take the girl and claim the bond for ourselves." Saren felt nausea rise. Draxen tried to stand, but the lingering wounds still slowed him. Saren's fingers curled into fists. "The bond isn't something you can steal," she said. "You don't understand it." Rigger sneered. "Then show us." He lunged. Saren barely had time to react. The moment Rigger moved, instinct surged through her like burning sunlight. She raised her hands, and a wave of force crashed outward, stronger, brighter, sharper than before. Rigger was thrown backward, slamming into a tree with bone-jarring force. His wolves howled in shock. Saren gasped, her entire body trembling, but the energy didn't stop. It pulsed again, forming a shimmering barrier around her and Draxen. Draxen stared at her, all widening his eyes. "Saren, the bond has awakened fully." She shook her head, her breath ragged. "But I don't know how to control it." "Then let it guide you," he said. "You are not alone in it." Rigger rose, fury contorting his features. He shifted back into wolf form and charged. His pack followed. Saren braced herself as the barrier flickered. When Rigger struck, the energy shattered outward in a violent shockwave. Wolves were flung through the air like leaves in a storm. The ground trembled. When the light faded, the wolves lay scattered, stunned, defeated, groaning in pain. Rigger staggered to his feet, wobbling. Saren stepped forward, chest heaving, every part of her shaking. She didn't feel powerful. She felt terrified. But she met Rigger's glare, without blinking. "Leave," she said softly. "There has been enough blood." Rigger snarled, but didn't advance. Draxen stood tall now, recovering strength flowing through him. "I am the rightful alpha," he declared. "Vork challenged me. He lost." Silence fell. Rigger gave a final hateful growl, then turned, limping into the forest. The others followed. When the last paw print vanished, Saren collapsed to her knees, trembling violently. Draxen caught her. "You did it," he murmured. "Saren, you saved us both." She shook her head. "I don't know what I'm becoming." Draxen cupped her face, voice rough. "Whatever it is, you are not becoming it alone." But behind his eyes, there was fear. Fear of the truth he had finally realized. "Saren," he whispered, "the bond, it's changing you. And I think I finally understand why." Dawn crept over Thornmere like a weary sigh, washing the battered forest in pale gold as Saren Vale sat beside Draxen Thornwolf, her back pressed to the trunk of an ancient elm. Her body still thrummed with echoes of the power she had unleashed the night before, the strange, golden force that surged from her like a second heartbeat. Draxen watched her quietly, his wounds now faint scars thanks to her unintentional healing. Saren hugged her knees, trying to quiet the storm inside her chest. The bond felt different today, stronger, clearer, as though threads of invisible light connected them. "You're thinking too loudly," Draxen murmured softly. Saren lifted her gaze to him. "I'm terrified." "Of what?" "Of myself. Of what I did. Of what I am now." Draxen knelt in front of her, eyes glowing warm amber in the morning light. "You are still Saren. Nothing will ever change that." She shook her head, but something inside me changed. I felt it. The power wasn't human. Draxen hesitated, then reached out, letting his hand hover near her cheek without touching. The bond reacts to emotion, to need, to truth. "Last night, it revealed yours." Draxen shifted closer, not touching, but offering warmth against the rising panic swelling through her. "There are old legends," he said quietly, speaking of humans who, through an unbroken act of sacrifice, awakened dormant traits triggered only through a true alpha bond. Saren shook her head fiercely. "I didn't awaken anything. I reacted. I just wanted you safe." "That's exactly why," Draxen murmured. "Selfless intent shapes the bond. It strengthens it. Last night, when you called me back, when you begged for my life, the bond heard you." Tears stung Saren's eyes. "But I didn't mean to hurt anyone." "You didn't," Draxen said. "Rigger's pack came to kill. You defended." Saren's voice trembled. "If I can do that without meaning to, what happens when I feel something stronger? What if I lose control?" Draxen held her gaze steadily. "Then I will anchor you, just as you anchored me." Saren stared at him, heart pounding. "Why me?" Draxen exhaled slowly. "Because the bond chose you. Not fate, not magic, your choices. Your courage. Your mercy." Before she could speak, the sound of footsteps rustled through the brush. Saren stiffened. Draxen rose swiftly, placing himself between her and the sound. But instead of wolves emerging from the shadows, a cluster of villagers stepped into the clearing, Tavia Lorne leading them, Reelan crestfall at her side with his bow lowered but ready. Saren's breath caught. The fear in their eyes cut her deeply. Tavia took a hesitant step forward. "Saren, are you hurt?" Saren stood slowly, brushing dirt from her palms. "I'm fine." Tavia's gaze flicked to Draxen. "Is he?" Draxen remained silent, shoulders squared, protective but non-threatening. Reelan glared. "We saw lights, heard howls. And the ridge," he swallowed. "What happened?" Saren's pulse raced. She could lie. She could hide. Or she could finally step out of the shadows. She brushed past Draxen gently and faced her people. "Vork attacked," she said. Draxen fought him. And he fell. Gasps echoed through the clearing. Saren continued, voice steadying. "And when Vork's pack came, Draxen protected me. Protected Thornmere." The villagers exchanged uneasy glances. The villagers murmured among themselves, uncertainty clouding their faces. Saren took a deep breath. "Vork is gone," she continued. "His pack came for revenge. They could have destroyed Thornmere. But they didn't, because Draxen fought for us." Reelan bristled. "And you? What did you do?" Saren hesitated only a moment. "I protected him. And the village. Whether you believe that or not." Tavia stepped closer, eyes softening. "We saw the ridge at dawn," she whispered. "The scorch marks, the broken earth, something powerful happened." Saren swallowed hard. It was the bond. Silence rippled. Reelan's jaw tightened. "So you're tied to him?" Saren nodded slowly. "I chose to help him. And now we face whatever comes next together." Tavia's hand trembled as she touched Saren's arm. "We've never had someone like you in Thornmere." Saren's voice softened. "I'm still me." Draxen stepped to her side, not touching her but making his presence known. Reelan lowered his bow. "If he threatens this village again, he won't. Saren said firmly. No wolf will. The conviction in her voice silenced everyone. The villagers dispersed slowly, carrying whispers of awe and uncertainty with them. When they were gone, Saren let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Draxen turned to her, searching her face. You were brave, he murmured. I was terrified, Saren replied. Bravery isn't the absence of fear, he said. It's moving despite it. She looked at him, her heartbeat settling into something steady and warm. Draxen, if the bond is changing me, what does that mean for us? Draxen stepped closer, the quiet morning settling around them like a soft cloak. It means, he said gently, that you are tied to the alpha of a pack without a home. A man with enemies. A path filled with dangers. Saren lifted her chin. Then I'll face them. With you. Draxen's breath hitched softly. You don't have to choose this life. Saren smiled faintly. I already did. The moment I spent my last coins to save you. Draxen's expression softened, the fierce warrior replaced by something tender, almost fragile. Saren, she reached for his hand, intertwining their fingers. I don't regret it. Not for a heartbeat. And as sunlight finally broke through the trees, Draxen drew her gently into his arms, claiming her not with force, but with the quiet, unshakable certainty of a bond earned, not taken. If you made it all the way to the end of this story, you're incredible. Before you go, tell me this in the comments. What was your favorite moment from Saren and Draxen's journey? And do you want a sequel? Should we continue their story or explore a brand new world next? Your comments help me choose what to create next, so don't be shy. And if you want more intense, emotional, cinematic werewolf romances like this one, make sure you're subscribed and turn on notifications so you never miss a chapter. Thank you for watching. Thank you for feeling this story with me. And until our next adventure,
Stay brave.
stay wild and stay connected to the stories that choose you.